Welcome back to Product Data Weekly. This is a short practical podcast where each week we break down the operational issue that slows down launches, creates manual work, or quietly limits growth inside product data and e-commerce teams. There's no theory, no hype, just what we actually see happening inside catalogs at scale. I'm Claire, I'm co-founder of SKU Launch and Start With Data. And
hi everyone, again, it's Ben here. Lovely to join you, Claire, again for another chat.
Right, what are we going to cover today, Ben?
So we thought today, or this week, we'd cover something that kind of came off the back of a webinar. Yeah, we ran a while back actually, and it's a kind of on the back of that webinar. Yeah, it definitely hit a nerve with a lot of listeners. So what we're going to talk about is why supplier data is never usable, and give kind of businesses a few tips on what they can do to make it more usable, hopefully in the future.
Sure.
Why does this keep coming up?
From my point of view, what we see is that a lot of teams will go out and buy PIM, or they'll go out and they'll create an onboarding template internally, and they'll force customers to use, or they will get a supplier portal. And I say portal because it's just a fancy login screen. And they think that basically this is just going to solve the problem. But the more and more that you kind of dig into why it's not working, these tools and templates and tools assume that the data is coming in a particular way that is usable. That's the biggest blocker. Everybody assumes that this is getting sorted, but actually I think it's actually the opposite.
I agree. The process assumes the data arrives in a certain state and it never does. And yeah, ultimately you end up with like big teams of people just transforming data between the supplier and the, the system or the PIM or the ERP or whatever. I think sometimes we call them like human middleware, don't we? That's literally what they're doing. They're just transposing data or filling in the gaps. So just to frame this a bit more as well for listeners, like there's different business models where this is valid, but the main business models are in distribution, where there's a lot of SKUs, there's a lot of technical attributes, and there's a lot of suppliers. There often are a lot of suppliers in particularly in B2B distribution. And effectively all those suppliers trying to provision data into one product model. There's a volume problem. I think with retail, it's quite similar. And actually in retail, it's like a high volume of product introductions and a churn of product introductions, particularly in like consumer goods and things. And then the other business model we see a lot in is marketplaces, where you've got multiple marketplace vendors submitting data into supposedly one schema, one taxonomy. So yeah, but through all of those businesses, it's a common thread. And it's also then a problem for the suppliers. You can kind of look at it from both angles. You can look at it from the distributor, marketplace, retail angle in terms of their teams, but you can also the suppliers, just the level of frustration. I think when we deal with manufacturing businesses with our clients, they're often just just really frustrated, aren't they? I think they ultimately end up with like 15 different templates from 15 different distributors.
Yeah,
trying to
they don't have large product teams to be able to transform that data into the 15 different templates that they need it. So yeah, I think that it's that whole transformation thing, and I think that's the key, is that it doesn't really matter whether you're a distribution, retailer, or marketplace. It's that they need the data. It's all coming in different shapes and sizes, and they need it in a particular way.
Because just building on, say, volume, we often talk about like volume of suppliers, volume of product introductions, but we've spoken a lot in other conversations about the growth of like the data requirement from suppliers is building, and like why it's building. Why is it growing? So the point is you can still be a distributor or retailer with a relatively small volume of SKUs and small volume of suppliers. It's still a problem because you need to get a lot of data.
We often will work with clients that they do highly technical or building materials or things like that. So there's actually some compliance stuff that is putting a lot more pressure on the information that's needed. There's also, like, if you're looking further down the road, there's also, digital product passport and things like that people are trying to get prepared to get as much data as possible. But then there's also the fact that businesses, they want to digitize everything, whereas back in the day, you used to have a lot of humans that would kind of be able to scan PDFs and make buying decisions and things like that. You're going from that to, say, we talk a lot about agent-led commerce now. So what's happening in the market, the machines are actually the ones that are consuming this data now, not humans. So they can't fill in all of those gaps that humans used to be able to. So I think that's probably the big shift that we're seeing. It's not only the scale of it, but it's actually the way in which our businesses are buying now.
There's no limit to the amount of data that you can give agents and LLMs in order to help customers make buying decisions. But I think the suppliers ultimately take the brunt of all this. It's interesting. I mean, we've seen some quite complex programs of supplier onboarding carried out in some very big businesses. And, you can use a load of automation and everything. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's kind of making it easier for the suppliers, isn't it? That's what it all comes down to. So let's just take like a real example. So when we talk about supplier data onboarding, what we're talking about is the interactions that it takes between a supplier and a and a distributor or retailer or a marketplace to launch a single SKU, right? That's fundamentally where the business case is here. And on average, we see 10 to 15 interactions per supplier SKU. It includes 2 to 5 hours to verify the data per SKU, up to a month from receiving the initial product introduction to launching it.
That is the scale of the problem. Those numbers that you're actually talking about were from a real customer of ours that thankfully that
Yeah.
it's not that long of a process anymore. And that is the problem, is that it's a lot of this back and forth. It's the manual verification that you're losing out to your competitors if they're able to launch a product quicker than you. If it's taking you a month to actually launch a product, everybody focuses on when it's in when they've actually got it in their warehouse, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your product is ready to go live. And
No.
that's a real competitive advantage for some businesses if they can make that
Mm.
happen.
Mm.
So that's from, I guess, the distributor, retailer, marketplace perspective, is that, it's taking that long, but it's also a huge effort for the supplier to be interacting, as well, because they're doing that for they probably ended up doing that for multiple businesses as well. So this manual work, it often goes under the radar because it's just how it's always been done. But when you actually look at these stark numbers, it's a real
Yeah.
issue for businesses.
Yeah. I think as well, like just that point about it being done under the, almost like shadow IT, businesses just don't understand what's happening.
Mhm.
They kind of take it for granted, particularly at an exec level. I think it always staggers me. So one of the things that I've seen a lot in retail and distribution customers is this disconnect between category management and digital, in the sense that obviously the process for acquiring data is directly impacting customer experience, because filters and navigation and all of that sort of stuff are driven by the data that's being collected on the category side of the business. And I often see just a complete disconnect between those two sides of the organization. Often, you can have like the best data onboarding process in the world, but if you're capturing the wrong data or not enough of it, it's going to make absolutely no impact on how that data is then used, for your customers. So we've talked, obviously, there's a big problem here, right? I think, let's just talk a bit about what you need to get in place to make this more efficient.
I always see there's 3 levers that you can pull. So structure, usability, and automation. And a lot of people try to skip the first 2 and go straight to automation thinking, oh, cool, a tool will just sort that out. So do you want to just describe a bit more about what we mean by structure?
Yeah. So when we talk about structure, it's like the goal with structure is to make any supplier data workable without forcing the supplier to actually reshape it, right? So it's like if you're saying supplier fill in this spreadsheet with 100 attributes, that is not a workable process. Okay, particularly if you mandate all of those things as mandatory. So one of the things that we talk a lot about now is the difference between what you onboard from the supplier versus then the reshaping activity. And if you can decouple those two things, so if you can decouple the actual capture of supplier data from the enrichment, normalization, transposition, content enrichment side of things, you're then not blocking the data coming in. And the reality is also where you decouple those two concepts in an onboarding process, you kind of make the effort much lower for the supplier. They kind of give what they already have, right? So think of it as kind of like two structures. One is an onboarding structure, and one is then like a presentational structure that data becomes. And if you set it up like that, then it builds a very scalable foundation. You could even ask your suppliers to onboard their whole line card in an unstructured format, right?
We've seen this time and time again in the industry. We see it, not mentioning any names, but from associations or federations and things like that, that they will send out, the
Data
merchants.
calls. Yeah.
Yeah, the merchants, require all of this information, and they send it out to suppliers that a lot of their information, they've probably already sent to these merchants many a times. A lot of the information is in PDFs or various different formats, and they get sent a 200 attribute list with 30 different tabs that they have a team of 1 to 2 people that are then expected to turn this around in 2 weeks and give all of this information. And it's just not, it's, you can't expect suppliers to conform to this and, what enjoy doing business with you. It's really difficult.
What about usability then? So assuming you get that structuring right and you decouple source onboarding from your presentational taxonomy.
Yeah, well, the whole goal around usability is to remove that back and forth between the supplier. So it's kind of being really clear about what it is you're asking them for. So every field that you're asking them for has, a specific name, a purpose, how they expect it to be captured, so that it's that whole clear is kind thing that stops the back and forward. If they know what's being asked for, it's going to be really easy for them to give it to you. The flexibility of being able to, whether depending on how you're doing it, but whether it's being able to copy and paste or upload a PDF and that be extracted or however, it's that flexibility for them, because again, not every supplier is going to have the data in the same format.
Mm,
I think a big thing is removing friction or reducing friction whilst not reducing quality. Clear kind of guidelines of what you want. That should mean that it's, simple to access. There's, the barriers that are there removed away for them.
mm.
I think another point that we see is actually giving them some guidance.
I agree. Like, yeah. And like a lot of portals, abbreviated commas, they fall short, don't they? Like what we see in a lot of distributors is there's different maturities from the supplier's perspective. You need to give them a process and tooling that meets their maturity needs. So if you're a small to medium supplier, typing your data into a form is perfectly sufficient, but that form needs to actually tell them what the definitions are of every attribute, give them guidelines, validation rules, what's mandatory, all of that sort of stuff. Whereas if you're a massive supplier, let's go to the other end of the scale. We've got a customer that onboards literally tens of thousands of eTIM file based products. That is a very automated process that requires giving suppliers bulk import tools and things to actually map and import data. But the guidelines, even within using those tools, if you end up spending 10 hours trying to educate a supplier on how to use a portal to onboard 50 products, you literally might as well have just gone and captured the data yourself
Exactly.
off their website.
Yeah,
So
and we've actually seen that out there talking to a prospect that has bought a supplier onboarding tool that, it's been in their business for 9 months and they've got, I think, 3 suppliers on it, and they
yeah,
have
yeah,
about three or four
using
hundred
it.
suppliers because it's not frictionless for the supplier to use it and there's no incentive for them to do it. And we touched on, so automation being the third one. And so what's the problem with skipping straight to automation?
There's a few tools on the market now that kind of force automation as a concept. If you don't have a defined structure and usability foundation, you will just end up automating a mess. Or you'll automate some of it, but then it's like you automate 20% of it, but then the other 80% you'll still have a team of people transposing data and mapping data and all of that sort of stuff. I think ultimately the whole idea of automation, and when we say automation in the sense of onboarding, can be things like mapping templates or AI extraction or auto normalization. It's all of those sorts of concepts. It's not taking the humans out of the process. It's just automating all those pernickety tasks that humans currently have to do, just using some AI and automation to do that. And then it's automating things like consistency of units and formats and stuff.
Mm.
So, but the point being that if you don't have the structured foundation in place at the beginning, it's very difficult to use all of those automations. And to be honest with you, I think that's where the majority of PIMs and onboarding platforms and vendor portals have fallen short. I think ultimately most of these portals are just glorified Excel templates in a screen that don't actually automate anything, um, and just cause more of a pain point in terms of data reconciliation and stuff. Um, yeah, so there's a long way to go, but it's in that order, isn't it? It's like structure, usability, and then automation. And I don't know, like, what in terms of just a practical plan, just to wrap up, like, as you think of this as this huge program of investment, it's not, is it?
It's breaking it down. It's defining what is it that you want your data to look like to be usable, because there's no point in going out to try and look at tools or changing the process or anything like that if you're not clear on what that looks like first. As I said before, so reducing friction and not standards. The easier that it is for suppliers to give you the information, the more timely you're going to get the information, and probably the more accurate and complete that you're going to get the information. It's incredible the difference that we see in supplier interactions once this process is working really smoothly. Don't start off by chasing completeness. If you're starting, obviously completeness is
Mm.
the ultimate goal, but people can kind of get trapped in that perfect completeness score and not move it forward. So it's about looking at what the minimal viable content is that you need to onboard the product. And then you can kind of incrementally, once that process is working, you can then incrementally do that. Again, it also depends on the process and tools that you're using, because it might be easier to do that if you're automating. Automation, I guess, is the last point, is that's able then to fill gaps that would be difficult for suppliers to do without a lot of manual work.
And one of the things we've seen work really well is that whole kind of maybe take a kind of iterative approach to doing this. So you're not going to like redesign the entire process for every supplier. If you've got 300 suppliers, the massive program work. But what you could do is you could put one supplier and one category, and you could actually test the process with the supplier. What amazes me is how few businesses use suppliers as a source to improve the process. So actually like sitting down with the supplier and saying, we want to improve this process so it becomes frictionless for you. Tell us all the pain points within our process.
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
that collaborative approach, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's, instead of just imposing something that they don't know if it's going to work or not for the supplier, just having a candid conversation to find
Yeah.
out what
Saying
works.
like an MVP, like let's
Yeah.
do an MVP together of like improving a little bit of this process. So it makes your role, your job a bit easier. Yeah. And then you could roll it out gradually across several suppliers, it may even be that some suppliers you just don't change it, but then there might be some smaller suppliers that, yeah, it becomes, you can make it much easier for. So yeah, don't do it all at once. I mean, and ultimately, you could also pick one of the levers as well. That's another way to do it. You could just say, do you know what? We're just going to focus on usability in our existing supplier template. Maybe actually give some guidance notes on the column headers. Yeah, not naming any names again, but yeah.
If you're looking at kind of a bigger program or a really complex program, we also offer supplier onboarding strategy calls. So it can just be a 30-minute practical plan looking at your specific current supplier onboarding and where you want to get to. So we can definitely help out with that. We also have our Product Data Weekly newsletter, which comes out every Thursday. And so you can sign up to that at productdataweekly.com. And yeah, good luck with the supplier onboarding. It's a big task, but it's one bite of the elephant at the time. You see like massive changes in business. Great to chat.
Thanks, Claire.
See
Chat to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.